Luigi Marattin is an Italian economist, academic, and politician who currently serves as a secretary of the Liberal Democratic Party, a centrist reformist movement he helped found in March of this year. Thank you so much for being with the Media Line today.
Thank
And
you for having me.
after your meetings in Metula and Jerusalem, in your trip that you did in Israel, what on the ground facts most change your assessments of Israel's northern front and regional dynamics?
Well, yes, we spent 3 days in Israel. It was a wonderful trip organized by the American Jewish Committee and involved a delegation of 10 member of parliaments from different national parliaments in the European Union, France, Romania, Lithuania, Italy. And we spent 3 days in Israel and 3 days in the Emirates. In Israel, we've been basically in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and as you mentioned, we've been brought up to the northern border and the southern border with Gaza, where we spent some emotional time visiting the Nova Memorial and the Kibbutz Be'eri, which was the one most heavily attacked by Hamas on October 7. Um, well, it was incredibly informative trip and emotional again, because we had a chance to meet with the politicians and at the Knesset in Jerusalem or to the government officials on the security agencies, which gave us good insights of what's really going on. So basically, even before the trip, I was already convinced that the narrative we had in the West, in Europe, was very much distorted. And after this trip, I'm even more convinced on this opinion. The real question is why we had such a distortion in the information, and maybe we'll come back to that later. But I mean, basically, the thing is that I was able to feel that there is a lot of hope among everybody in the region, both in the Arab world, in the Palestinians, because we met some Palestinian politicians, obviously heavily anti-Hamas, also anti the Palestinian National Authority, because they are criticizing that as well. But obviously in Israel, there's a lot of hope that this time might be different because there are a lot of conditions, external conditions, the diminished role of Iran in the region, the role of Syria in the region, the fact that the Lebanese government is for the first time asking Hezbollah to disarm, the fact that something is changing probably within the Palestinian community after these terrible 2 years. So there are some external conditions, not to mention the Trump administration plan, which probably is pretty effective in the sense that is able to bring together a lot of, to make interest aligned, so to speak. So there is a lot of hope, a lot of awareness that this is a crucial time. This time might be different. Obviously, this thing has been going on for 78 years, so no one is foolish enough to believe that it's going to be easy. There are still a lot of open questions, but what I was able to feel on the ground, is that people perceive that this time might be different if people of goodwill on both sides start getting their mind around that.
Interesting to understand your, insight on this. I want to move, into another topic. In which two or three areas do you position Israel's policy, and in which ways it may diverge from the current governments that you see in general, and why?
Well, obviously, I had the impression that the Israeli society is very polarized on that. It's very polarized on the Netanyahu government, as it should be in liberal democratic societies. That's not a problem. I mean, obviously, that government, the way he operated was very divisive among the society, and there's nothing wrong about that. My impression is that the far right, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, I mean, we in Europe we gave them much more importance than Israeli do. Maybe because of the distortion I was talking about, we need in the West an excuse to condemn Israel. And so, what better than using the I mean, dangerous, in my opinion, words that often Ben-Gvir and Smotrich say. But in the Israeli society, everybody know that this is not going to be real policy, right? Just, I mean, some rage, which is natural sometimes to develop in this kind of context. Um, well, it's always hard because after a war and after a massacre like it was the one on 7, October 7, it's hard to say what the government should have done differently. Maybe the deal, the ceasefire could have happened 6 months ago, maybe. But I mean, we know that Hamas accepted the deal only because it was forced to by the traditional sponsor. Qatar, maybe Turkey. So it was out of Israeli hands. But maybe there's something that Israel could have done to make the ceasefire happen 6 months before, maybe. For sure, there is something that Israel can do in the near future, which is, well, there's going to be elections within the year. So, I mean, power to the people. People will decide whether to shift the composition because Israel is a proportional system of government. So, I mean, maybe the government is the result of a composition among political parties. And this is up to the Israeli people, of course. Um, I don't know, maybe just try understand again that this time is different and the actions that Israeli politicians, the decisions that Israeli politicians make this time, they're going to affect the next 10, 15 years, hopefully even more if it's going to be a peace outcome. So this is something that probably I mean, it's an area of potential improvement. Once you realize that this time is not, this time is different. The moment is different and the conditions are different. So the decisions that you make now are going to affect the next decades. And once you realize that, I mean, your actions maybe are driven by something else.
What do you think are going to be the three concrete steps that Italy should do in its way of supporting in the next, let's say, 90 days of the post-war in Gaza? And do you think, in general, there's going to be an overall plan for both the Gaza Strip and the northern situation we see at the border with Lebanon?
Well, that's the question, right? What's going to happen now? This is something we've been talking a lot also in our trip. I mean, how to implement the 20 points of the Trump plan and what's the next step, how we're going to do it. That's the question. Well, Italy, there's not much Italy alone can do. I was very happy for the decision of the government not to recognize the Palestinian state, unlike what Canada, France, and maybe someone else did, because that was a mistake, because it sounded like an award to the mass actions on October 7th. So I was very much against that thing, and I'm happy that the government didn't do it. Now, the role, if any, it's only of the European Union, but frankly speaking, I mean, European Union is pretty much ineffective in the international arena right now for a number of reasons that maybe if you want, we can investigate, but they're outside the scope of this talk. So the steps are who is going to disarm Hamas, when, and how. That's the first step, in my opinion. And I would be lying to you if I told you that after this trip, I got a clear idea on what's going to happen. I don't know if people don't know or they know it, they can't say because obviously this is very delicate stuff. But the first step is who is going to disarm Hamas, when, and how. It's going to be an international force. It's composed by what countries? Italy, going back to Italy's role, we have like 10 or 12 Carabinieri, which is an Italian armed force at Rafah, I guess. But it's very negligible presence. So I don't know whether in this international force, Italy or Europe countries will gonna commit troops or not. I don't know who is gonna do it, but that's the first step. Second step is when we can have elections in the Palestinian world. Because we met many people who believe that this time, if there are fair elections, they won't be like last time, like in 2006 when Hamas won the elections. But obviously, there's no way to know that. But I think that's a crucial step as well, because think how beautiful it would be if Hamas would, was voted out by Palestinians instead of crashed by Israeli bombs. That would be really good if Hamas will be voted out by Palestinians. And then obviously there are a number of steps following those two. But the first two are this one. Who's gonna come in and disarm Hamas? When and how? And if and when we can have Palestinian elections, and which kind of parties uh, jump into the Palestinian elections. We met some of them, which are getting ready. And it's a wonderful thing because they are led by the goal of two-state solution, I mean, the pacific coexistence with Israel. But we know very well that moving from theory to practice, especially when it comes to elections, is not always easy. But these are the two immediate steps, in my opinion.
I want to go back to your trip and understand, which kind of feelings, aside from the political, view that we have discussed so far, on the emotional level. You've been also at the northern border. We know that, the escalations are actually ongoing currently between Israel and Hezbollah, as we know. What are your thoughts when you set foot, in Metula especially?
Yeah, well, I forgot in the last questions to answer about the northern border. There, the crucial step is whether the Lebanese government is going to commit to disarm Hezbollah and whether the Iran access, the Iran proxies are actually going to be even more diminished than they are, just to complete the picture of the last question. As far as the emotional side, well, uh, politicians are supposed not to express their emotions, and I can really tell that what I saw on that day was last Tuesday. I'll never forget that in my life. In the northern border, well, the situation obviously was different. And again, there, well, in the northern border, actually, I was able to talk to a bunch of soldiers, very young soldiers, and that was really a very good experience because they were like, I don't know, 18, 19, they could have been my kids. Um, and that was emotional because I was talking to them, telling them what really in the West, in Europe, is going on, and I mean that was very, very, very emotional as well. But um, obviously, I am actually it was much more emotional in the south because we went to the Nova Memorial Site. And we met Remo, a policeman, who actually told us what happened on that day, how many people, how many lives he saved. Um, and then the visit at the kibbutz Be'eri was something really that I never experienced in my life, especially because in the meantime there were bombings in Gaza because after Hamas broke the ceasefire by killing a soldier and by messing up with the remainings of some of the hostages, obviously Israel, the IDF attacked Gaza, and we were there just 4 kilometers away. And that was, I don't know, I wish many people who demonstrated in the streets of Europe in the last couple of months went to that kibbutz. We we waste a lot of public money in Italy, and maybe a good use of the money, public money, would be to pay some selected trips to selected people and to let them know what really happened on that day. Because I'm not sure that after seeing what we saw, I'm not sure whether they will still go out marching in the streets chanting that Palestine should be free from the river to the sea, often not even knowing what that slogan means. But there was a lot of misinformation in the West. And obviously, this is an exaggeration because we cannot move thousands of people to that kibbutz. But I wish it was possible because after you see these things, at least you learn to have a more balanced view because no one here is supporting ex ante Israel or Palestine. No one is doing that. We have no vested interest in these things. We want Israel and Palestinians live free in peace together. But people who march in the streets, that didn't seem their intentions. So I wish that the trip to that kibbutz or other cities, Derot, on all these, but those horrible events took place, could uh, teach them how to have a more balanced view because on this matter in Italy and in Europe we didn't have at all anything like a balanced view.
And according to you, talking about, you mentioned the demonstrations that took place that are mostly pro-Palestinian, the majority of them. We saw also recently demonstrations by the Jewish community or those who wanted to support the fight against anti-Semitism. Let's talk about this big elephant in the room. The data of this year is quite said regarding the numbers of increase of anti-Semitism in all Europe. What do you think can be done and should be done in universities, in the media exposure also, and the platforms in order to be held to account certain, behaviors and also safeguarding a more legitimate debate?
You know, anti-Semitism has always been there in Europe and in the West for centuries, maybe even more. It would be an illusion to think that you can wipe it out. It would be a dream. It would be what is needed. But something that's been there for centuries, I mean, you don't easily eradicate it. If not, I mean, just keep going what you do. Show them what happened during the Second World War and the Holocaust, and to teach people that you can discriminate according to race, religions, color of the skin, and so on. But we are doing these things. I mean, it would be unfair to deny that we are doing these things. But still, anti-Semitism is something, it's a snake that, I mean, it's very hard to eradicate, unfortunately. But obviously, all the efforts needs to be done in that respect. What I think is that anti-Semitism was just part of the equation, part of the picture. The second part was that every time you have an international conflict between one big capitalist guy and one small anti-capitalist guy, people, especially in the center left of the political spectrum, tend to side with the latter. They tend to use the international conflict as if David against Goliath for their own domestic political purposes. It happened in Vietnam in the 60s. It happened in 2003 during the Iraq US-led invasion of Iraq. I'm not judging the merit of those conflicts. I mean, if I lived there, I would have been against the Vietnam War. I was against the invasion of Iraq. I mean, it's nothing to do with whether that war was just or not. It's just that when it happens, and when there is a big market economy, militarily strong guy fighting a small resistance of bad guys, from my point of view, people tend to side with the small groups fighting capitalism. Because in Western society, there is a part of society who never digested market economy and Western societies. That's the truth. And the third part of the equation of the picture was the misinformation, because I know a lot of right-wing people, so they're nothing to do with the second point. They are not fascinated by the fight against capitalism and the strong guys. I know a lot of right-wing people who went down to the streets, marched to the street, demonstrated because the TV and the newspaper told them that Israel is killing kids, is killing children. Because the circuit of misinformation this time was so strong that it reached the hearts and the minds of normal people, which went to the streets. And this is the big question. I mean, why it happened? Why this time the disinformation was so big? I mean, why the information circus took as a source the numbers provided by Hamas? I mean, no one in the Second World War was using as a source the numbers provided by the SS commanders here in Italy during the occupation. No one was using those numbers. Why did we use the numbers provided by Hamas? So these are the reasons why, unfortunately, I do believe that anti-Semitism is the smallest part of this tree. Is the worst. Is by far the worst. but was the smallest. The other two were bigger and I mean even more complicated to eradicate sometimes.
You're part of the Liberal Democratic Party. I want to understand a little bit more about your stand and understand what are also the differences with the current government that we see in Italy, and also which are the main values that do not match, both in terms of domestic and foreign policy, because this is important to mention.
You know that Italy political spectrum for the last 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall has been divided by center left and center right. Uh, Ironically, without having electoral laws to support that. You know that in England, in Great Britain, you have Labour and Conservatives. Actually, you also have the Lib Dem there, but you have a full majoritarian electoral law, and you have that for 200 years. The same in US. You have two main parties, which we can label center left and center right. And you have a full majoritarian electoral law for 250 years. In Italy, you have this division between center left and center right without having a majoritarian electoral law and without ever having been a two parties country. Because in Italy history, Italian history, since the Republic, but even before the Republic, we never had two political cultures like in the Anglo-Saxon world. We never had that. We had liberals, we had conservatives, we had socialists, we had Catholics, we had communists. So we wanted, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, to reduce this complexity in either there or there, center left or center right. And it kind of worked as long as the political competition was aimed at the median voter. When you were Prodi, Romano Prodi and Silvio Berlusconi, they were two leaders of the respective center left and center right, which were converging to the center. They were fighting for the median voter. So it kind of worked. In my opinion, retrospectively, it didn't. But what happened in the last 10, 15 years that people in center right and center left stopped looking for the median voter and started to look for the extreme voter.
Mhm.
So within the center right, you no longer had Silvio Berlusconi, but you have extremists, which fortunately, I mean, I will go back to that. At the government, they are behaving very differently for what they promised in the electoral campaign, fortunately. But the way they got votes at the elections was by being far right extremists. Same thing in the left, which had a genetic mutation in Italy. And now it's an extremist movement, basically. So we felt that Italy is not like that. Italy can be reduced to the fight between two extremists. And so we felt there is a hole in the political representation at the center of a liberal democratic party. So we founded one. We founded one based on the principles, basically, the first principle in our manifesto is that we should defend Western societies. How do you define Western societies? Those who are featured by two things, democracy and market economy. Those are Western societies, democracy and political democracy and market economies. And we have the problem in center left and center right in Italy. You don't find anyone which support this position without being uh, denied by one of the allies. Because in the center right coalition, you have people which think that after all, Russia is not that bad. In the center left coalition, you have people, parties saying that obviously not only Russia after all is not that bad, but Palestinians should be free from the river to the sea. So you don't have a political offer in Italy which can legitimately say we will always defend Western values without having allies which think the opposite. That's the first thing. Second thing is the functioning of market economy. Uh, in Italy, we have a long tradition of people thinking that every problem we have can be solved by the intervention of the state. You find that in the left, you find that in the right. That's why we ended up being the European countries with the highest increase in public spending in the last 25 years and the lowest rate of GDP growth in the last 25 years. Because public spending is not the solution in Italy. And that's how we ended up being the countries in the OECD countries with the highest fiscal pressure on the middle income people. I could go on. I mean, there are a lot. Basically, the thing is that there are all the main features of the institutional and social and economic setting of these countries. They were lastly reformed in the 70s. Whether it's industrial policy, the school system, the health system, the industrial relationship, or you name it, the last structural reform was in the 70s. And in the 70s, we were in a world which was completely and totally different from this one. So we need a political party able to defend Western society and Western value and to tackle the Italian structural problems like never one has done in these last 30 years. That's why we founded the Liberal Democratic Party, and that's why our objective is that the next general elections in 2027 to have a situation where Italians can have a center left, a center right, and a liberal democratic political offer, which we are ready to build with someone else, and who else is going to share our vision of the world and vision of the Italian political system and what it needs.
We talked about your trip to Israel. I think it's important to mention the other trip that you did, which is to Dubai, to the
Yeah,
Emirates. Can
Emirates,
we
yeah.
acknowledge what's going on? Because now we have people calling for the boycott of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, in general, symbols of the Emirates due to the conflict in Sudan. What is the perception that you have as well? Because we know the diplomatic relation between Italy and the UAE are quite strong. What are
Yes.
your thoughts about, this call for boycott, the new political dilemma around it?
I asked them about that because obviously the aim of the trip was the Israel-Gaza situation, and I found incredibly support there. I mean, obviously, we know very well that the Emirates are not fully representative of the Arab world, but still, I mean, they are, their mind is very clear about it needs to be done in the Israeli-Gaza situation, and it is exactly the same view that we all have, I guess. Then I asked them about what's going on in Sudan. Obviously, the answer I got from was a minister of state is that their involvement is minimal or absent, and they just aiming at not having another situation where Islamic extremists can arise in the fight between these two military parts. And I mean, their primary objective, they were concerned with the need that we don't create another Gaza. These are my words, not theirs, but I mean, I can interpret them. Which obviously, if you hear these words, obviously, we have to agree. I have no information and no proofs and anything that the Emirates are behind what's going on in Sudan. What's going on in Sudan is terrible. It's a massacre. It's unacceptable, and the international community should be involved in that. I have no information on who is actually playing a role or not. What the Emirates told us that they just hope that that situation is not giving rise over time to another source of Islamic extremism, because they are very much committed against Islamic extremists. That's all I can say about that. Obviously, again, I don't have any proofs, or I don't know enough the Sudan situation to have an informed opinion about this thing. I asked them because I really believe that human rights protection is a priority for everyone. Obviously, they gave me a very diplomatic response, which, as far as I can know, can be true or not.
Mhm.
Uh, but I mean, generally speaking, I share the objective that we should prevent everywhere in the world the rise of situation which can give birth and harbor political extremists.
According to you, in general, there are going to be still solid relations between the two countries, correct? Italy and the UAE,
Italy,
despite
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, obviously, if there are some proofs emerging in the future about the direct responsibilities of that government, I mean, my Italian government has always been the first to condemn these kind of things. So I have no doubt that there will be evidence that the Emirates are responsible for something, which they are not at the moment. I'm sure that the Italian government will condemn that. Having said that, at the moment, the state of the economic and political relationship between Italy and the Emirates are very good, and we believe that Emirates can play an important role in the Arab world in the fight against extremists, because they are even more convinced that some in the West are
Mm.
about the danger that Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhoods, the Jihad, and every other political extremist organization, about the threat they pose to civilization. They're even more convinced that many of the people around here in the West.
What is your final, message after acknowledging all these points in our interview, which was a pleasure to have with you today? What do you want to acknowledge about the Middle East in general, since you just visited, and it's a region that has always been often misunderstood, let's say?
I always thought that before being able to comment or to know not only a country but even a person, it should, I mean, many years should go by. I mean, I always hated those who have a trip a few days in one country, they come back and they pretend they know everything about it. This goes for a country or a person, because it takes years even to get to know a person. Having said that, my impression, because it was only an impression, obviously that Middle East is one of the most complex region in the world, maybe the most complex one, which reinforces my reasoning, right? We shouldn't be caught in easy judgments. Uh, but I mean, this is the time of men and women of goodwill, because this time uh, we might be close to a solution. I can't count how many times people must have said that in the last 8 decades. But if you think about it from a historical point of view, if they say that, they will be wrong, because there was the Arab World Compact against Israel, and now you have an Arab League statement in August saying that Hamas should be out of the picture. What happened? I mean, how many times did you see that before? You had the Lebanese government disarming Hezbollah. You have Syria talking peace to Israel. How many times it happened in the past? You have Iran as its lowest point, uh, and so on and so forth. You have the Emirates with this such a strong position. Uh, so we might be real at a crucial time, but it is not, I mean, it's not by chance. Which way we take is not by chance. It's up to the men and women of goodwill on the Israeli side, on the Palestinian side, on the international side. That's my final, I mean, closing statement.
Thank you so much, really, for this interview and for your time today with the Media Line.
Thank you.